The slap landed before anyone saw it coming. Nkechi's palm connected with the side of Tobechukwu's face so hard that the sound echoed across the marble floor of his living room, and for 3 full seconds, neither of them moved. Then, Tobechukwu turned his face back slowly, jaw tight, eyes burning with something that was not anger. It was worse than anger. It was hurt. Deep, quiet, devastating hurt. "You lied to me," Nkechi said. Her voice was shaking. "You stood in front of me every single day and you lied." Tobechukwu did not raise his voice. He never did. That was the thing about him that had undone her from the beginning. He simply looked at her and said, "I never lied to you, Nkechi. I just did not tell you everything. There is a difference." "There is no difference," she screamed, and her voice cracked on the last word, and then she was crying. And she hated herself for crying because she had promised herself she would not. He crossed the room in 4 steps and pulled her into his chest before she could push him away, and she fought him for a moment, her fists balled against his shirt, but his arms were too steady, too sure, and eventually she stopped fighting and just stood there shaking while he held her. "I need you to trust me," he said quietly into her hair. "Not my money, not my name, me. Can you do that?" She did not answer, but she did not pull away either. If you are new here, subscribe right now and turn on your notification bell, because this story is going to break something inside you before it is over. Welcome back to the channel. Let us get into it. 3 weeks earlier, Tobechukwu had driven to Nkechi Street in a plain Toyota Corolla. Not because that was all he could afford, because that was what he chose. He had parked 2 streets away and walked the rest, hands in his pockets, completely ordinary looking, and Nkechi had opened her gate in a yellow cotton dress with her hair wrapped up and zero makeup, and she had looked, in his opinion, like the most beautiful woman he had ever seen in his entire life. "You walked here?" she asked, looking past him. "I took a keke to Sina Street," he said. 300 naira. She laughed, the real kind, the kind that came from the stomach. "My friends would disown me if they knew I was seeing a man who takes keke." "Then maybe your friends do not need to know yet," he said, and he smiled at her in that slow, quiet way that made something in her chest go loose. That was how it started. Nkechi had not told Adaeze, not because she was ashamed, but because Adaeze had a way of turning other people's happiness into a referendum on her own standards, and Nkechi did not want Tobechukwu measured and found lacking before she even understood him herself. She wanted to know him first, just him, not his car, not his job title, not what table he could book at a restaurant, just the man. And the man was extraordinary. He remembered everything she said, every small thing. When she mentioned offhand one evening that she had not eaten pepper soup since her mother passed, he showed up 4 days later with a pot of it, still hot, wrapped in a towel. When she told him she hated sleeping with the light on, he bought her a blackout curtain without being asked and installed it himself. He was not performing, he was paying attention. And in Nkechi's experience, a man who paid attention was rarer than any amount of money. They were 2 weeks into things the first time he kissed her. They had been sitting on his balcony. She had not yet been inside the full house. He always met her at the front, watching the sun go down behind the rooftops, and he had turned to say something and found her already looking at him. And neither of them said anything, for a moment. Then he reached up and touched the side of her face with his thumb, just gently, the way you touch something you are afraid of ruining, and she felt the air go completely out of her lungs. "Can I?" he asked. She did not trust herself to speak. She nodded once. When he kissed her, it was slow and careful, and it tasted like the zobo they had been drinking, and her hand came up on its own and gripped the front of his shirt, and she felt him smile against her mouth, and that was somehow the most undoing thing of all, that he smiled, that he was happy, that it was her making him happy. When they finally pulled apart, she kept her eyes closed for a second longer than necessary. "Nkechi," he said softly, "do not say anything. Just let it be what it is." He laughed quietly. "Okay." She opened her eyes and looked at him, and what she saw frightened her a little because it was too much, too soon, too real for something that was only 2 weeks old. Meanwhile, across town, Adaeze was giving a full lecture. She had Chidinma trapped in a boutique dressing room while she tried on an off-shoulder gown in deep wine, turning left and right before the mirror and cataloguing the exact categories of men she refused to entertain in this her one precious life. "No car," she said, holding up one finger. "No conversation. I am not doing public transport romance in this 2025. "Adaeze," Chidinma said, "not every good man has a car. Then he should get one before he comes to knock on my gate." She turned to the side and sucked in her stomach slightly. "I am a luxury. Luxuries are not for people on a budget." Chidinma looked at her for a long moment. "And Obina, he has a car, he has a house, he has a wife." Adaeze's expression did not change. "Obina is a situation, not a relationship. A situation that is funding your handbag collection." "Correct, and I am not apologizing for that." She unzipped the gown and reached for the next one. "Now stop judging me and tell me if this red one makes my hips look like a blessing or a problem." Chidinma shook her head slowly, but said nothing more, because she had learned over years of friendship with Adaeze that the woman would walk into fire with her head held high and dare the fire to flinch first. Arguing with her was like negotiating with a weather system. What Chidinma did not say, what she held quietly in her chest, was that she was starting to worry, not about Adaeze's standards, about Obina's wife. Because twice in the past month, she had seen a woman standing outside Adaeze's building, just standing, watching, and the woman's face had the particular expression of someone who had made up her mind about something terrible and was simply waiting for the right moment. That moment, Chidinma feared, was coming soon. Drop a comment below and tell us, Team Nkechi or Team Adaeze? We are watching the numbers. Do not forget to like this video before we continue. The Samsung phone arrived on a Tuesday. Nkechi had been sitting at her small dining table eating eba and vegetable soup when Tobechukwu knocked. She opened the door and he was standing there with a white box under his arm, completely unbothered, like he had simply come to return something he borrowed. "What is this?" she asked. "Your screen was cracked," he nodded, at the phone she had been managing for 4 months. "It was bothering me." She looked at the box, looked at him. "Tobechukwu, this is a Samsung S25 Ultra." "Yes, that is not a phone you buy because someone's screen is cracked. It is if the someone's screen has been cracked since January and she keeps holding the phone at an angle so she doesn't cut her finger." He tilted his head. "Are you going to take it or are we going to stand here discussing it?" She took it, but her mind was now doing arithmetic and the numbers were not adding up. He was a man who took Keke to her street, a man who wore plain trousers and ordinary shirt and never mentioned salary or savings or investment. Yet, the phone in her hand had retailed for over 400,000 naira. She knew because she had checked it online twice when someone at her office got one. "Tobe," she said slowly. "Nkechi," he replied in exactly the same tone, mocking her gently. "Who are you?" He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "Come with me. I want to show you something." He drove her that evening in a car she had never seen before. Not the Corolla. This was a dark grey Range Rover, quiet and smooth and smelling of leather. And she sat in the passenger seat with her hands folded in her lap, watching him drive and feeling like she had stepped into a parallel version of the past 6 weeks. He pulled through a gate on a tree-lined street in the part of the estate where the houses had second floors and generators that ran silently. The compound was wide and clean, and there were flowers along the fence that someone had planted with actual intention. He parked and sat for a moment without speaking. "This is your house?" she said, not a question. "Yes." "Not the small flat I thought." "I have a flat. I use it sometimes, but this is home." She turned to look at him fully. How long were you going to hide this? He was not hiding it. I was waiting to see if you wanted me before you knew what I had. Most people, once they know, he paused, they stop seeing you. They start seeing what they can get. I did not want that with you. Nkechi was quiet for a very long time. Then she said, you tested me. He invested in you, he said quietly. There is a difference. She looked out the windscreen at the house and thought about all the evenings she had brought him food in a takeaway pack, all the time she had split the cost of things without thinking, all the time she had said to herself, this man is not what Adaeze would approve of, but he's the realest thing I have felt in years, and that is enough. She thought about how she had never once asked him to be more than he appeared. And then, without quite planning it, she leaned across the center console and kissed him. Hard and deliberate, her hand coming up to cup his jaw, and she felt him go completely still for a surprised second before he kissed her back with a depth that made her head swim. When she finally pulled away, they were both slightly breathless, and his forehead dropped against hers and he laughed low in his throat. What was that for? She asked. For being real, even when you were pretending to be ordinary. He pulled her back in and kissed her again, slow at this time, and outside the evening birds were making their last noise before dark, and the generator in the compound hummed quietly, and Nkechi thought for the first time in a very long time that she might actually be safe. She did not tell Adaeze, not yet. She was not ready to share this thing with someone who would immediately begin to calculate its value in naira. But Chidinma found out, because Chidinma always found out. She had been at the plaza buying fabric when she spotted Nkechi stepping out of a dark Range Rover on the far side of the car park, laughing at something, head thrown back, looking like a woman who had recently been kissed senseless. The man walking round the car to meet her was tall, dark, dressed quietly in a way that said he did not need to announce himself. Chidinma stood very still, mouth slightly open. At lunch 2 days later, Chidinma cornered Nkechi. Who, Chidinma said, setting down her fork, is the man with the Range Rover? Nkechi looked at her for a moment. Then she said, which man? The one you were laughing with outside Grand Plaza last Saturday like someone who has lost all common sense. Nkechi looked at her for a moment. Then she said, his name is Tobechukwu. Tobechukwu, the one you said takes keke? Nkechi said, he takes keke sometimes. He also owns a Range Rover and a house in Emerald Estate, and I think maybe several other things I have not discovered yet. Chidinma stared. Nkechi? Nkechi said, I know. Chidinma, you have been sitting on this for how long? Nkechi, 6 weeks. Chidinma, 6? Chidinma pressed her lips together. And Adaeze? Nkechi said, Adaeze does not know. Chidinma, Adaeze carefully said is going to lose her entire mind. Nkechi said, I know that too. So what is the plan? Nkechi set down her fork and looked out the window for a moment. The plan is that I like him, actually like him, and I did not want to turn him into a conversation topic before I knew what he was to me. Now I know he is someone I want to keep. Chidinma looked at her for a long time. Then she exhaled and picked up her fork again. Okay, but when it comes out, and it will come out, do not say I did not warn you about Adaeze. It came out that same week, not because Nkechi told her, but because Obinna's wife chose that particular afternoon to rearrange Adaeze's entire life in public. They had been at lunch, Adaeze, Chidinma, and an unsuspecting plate of jollof rice, when the restaurant door opened and a woman walked in with the energy of someone who had rehearsed this moment in her bathroom mirror every morning for 6 months. Ugoma was not loud when she started. She was worse than loud. She was quiet. She walked directly to their table, stood over Adaeze, and said in a voice that carried perfectly across the restaurant's expensive silence, I have been very patient with you. My patience is finished today. Adaeze looked up slowly. I am eating. You will eat when I am done talking. Ugoma placed both hands on the table and leaned in. You have been sleeping with my husband for 14 months. You have been wearing things he bought with money from my home, and you have been looking me in the face in this city like you have not been doing it." The restaurant had gone completely quiet. Adaze's jaw was tight. Her eyes were glass. She said nothing. "I have the messages," Ugoma continued. "I have the bank transfers. I have everything. So when you see Obinna again, if you see him, tell him I said his bags are outside the gate." She straightened up, smoothed her blouse, and walked out. The restaurant remained silent for 3 full seconds. Then the noise came back, and with it, 100 eyes swiveling towards Adaze. Chidinma reached across the table. "Adaze, do not," Adaze said in a voice with no texture in it at all. "Do not say anything." She picked up her bag, she stood up, she walked out with her chin exactly parallel to the floor, and nobody could take that from her, no matter what. But Chidinma had seen for just a moment the way her hand was shaking when she reached for her bag. And she thought about how much Adaze had invested in a man who had just been dismantled in front of her by the woman who actually owned him. Like this video right now if you felt that scene, and share it with a friend who needs to see this story. We are not done yet. Obinna sent 500,000 naira to Adaze's account at 11:30 p.m. that night. No message, just the alert. Adaze sat on her bed in the dark, phone in her hand, staring at the notification. Her mascara had tracked down both cheeks hours earlier and dried there. She had not eaten since lunch. She had not answered any of Chidinma's calls. She looked at the money for a very long time. Then she opened her banking app and confirmed the transfer to her savings because she was Adaze, and Adaze did not waste resources just because she was in pain. But sitting in that dark room with 500,000 naira and a hollowed-out chest, something shifted in her, something she would not have admitted to anyone, not even Chidinma. She thought about the way Ugoma had walked into that restaurant, the way that woman had known exactly who she was, where she was sitting, what she looked like. She thought about being that known, that claimed, that worth fighting for. And then, without quite planning it, she thought about Nkechi. Nkechi, who had never chased a man with money in her life. Nkechi, who had spent 6 weeks dating a man they all assumed was struggling, who had apparently been covering some kind of extraordinary secret this entire time. Nkechi, who looked the last few times Adaze had seen her like a woman who slept through the night without worry. Adaze did not like what that comparison was doing to her insides. She was still sitting with it 2 days later when Tobechukwu proposed. It happened at a rooftop restaurant that Nkechi had not known was close to the public that evening. She had thought it odd, the empty tables, the string lights, the single musician playing something slow in the corner. Then, Tobechukwu had taken her hand across the table and looked at her with that steady, unguarded expression of his that she had come to understand meant he was about to say something that cost him something. "I have never been good at speeches," he said. "You are doing fine," she said softly. "I brought you here as a broke man," he said. "Or you thought I was, and you were kind to me anyway. Not performing kindness, real kindness. The kind that does not check what it will get back." He reached into his jacket. "I do not want to spend another 6 months pretending I am not trying to spend the rest of my life with you." The ring was simple, not excessive, a single stone on a slim gold band, and Nkechi thought later that only a man who had truly been paying attention would know that simple was exactly what she would have wanted. "Nkechi," he said, "will you?" She did not say yes with words. She stood up from her chair and crossed to his side of the table and took his face in both hands and kissed him so thoroughly that the musician in the corner missed a note and had to recover. When she finally sat back, both of them were smiling the kind of smile that belonged to people who had just solved something very complicated. "Yes," she said, "obviously yes." He slid the ring onto her finger and brought her hand up and pressed his lips to her knuckle, and she felt it in her spine. Someone at a nearby table, apparently the restaurant was not as empty as she had thought, began to clap, And then others joined, and Nkechi laughed and pressed her face into his shoulder out of sheer overwhelming emotion. The video of the proposal was posted by the musician. It was on 4 WhatsApp groups before midnight. Adaze watched it 3 times. She put her phone face down on the sofa. She picked it back up. She watched it a 4th time. Then she called Nkechi. Nkechi answered on the 2nd ring, voice warm and still giddy. "Nkechi." "When?" Adaze said. "Were you going to tell me?" The warmth in Nkechi's voice did not disappear, but it became more careful. "Tell me what exactly?" "That the man you have been dating for 6 weeks is not who you said he was." "I never said anything about who he was." "That is the problem, Nkechi." Adaze's voice was starting to tighten. "I am your friend, your best friend, and you sat across from me how many times while I warned you about men without money, and you sat there knowing—" "I sat there knowing you would do exactly this," Nkechi said quietly. "Turn him into an argument instead of a person." "I am not turning him into," Nkechi said. "You are calling me right now not to congratulate me, not to say you are happy for me. You are calling to let me know you feel left out. And Adaze, I love you. But I cannot apologize for protecting something good from being measured before it had time to grow." Adaze's jaw walked. "So you just decided for me? Decided I could not be trusted with your happiness?" "I decided," Nkechi said, "that my happiness was not information. It was mine." The silence on the line was the particular texture of 2 people who have known each other long enough to hurt each other with precision. Then Adaze said in a smaller voice than she intended, "You could have told me." "I know," Nkechi said gently. "And now I am telling you. His name is Tobechukwu. He is a good man. I want you to know him properly." Adaze said nothing for a moment. Then, "The ring looked simple. The ring is perfect." A pause. "Is he good to you?" "He is the best thing that has happened to me in years." Another silence, longer. Then, "Fine," Adaze exhaled. "Fine. But I want to meet him properly. Not this market introduction. Somewhere with a table and a menu." "Done," Nkechi said. "I love you, Adaze." "I know," Adaze said, and ended the call before her voice could betray her. Chidinma had her own conversation with Nkechi the following afternoon, less combative, more unsettling. They were sitting in Chidinma's living room, tea going cold between them, when Chidinma leaned forward and laced her fingers together in the way she always did before she said something difficult. "I am happy for you. I need you to hear that first." "I hear it," Nkechi said. But Tobechukwu is a man who deliberately hid significant wealth from everyone around him for months. And I understand his reason. I even respect it. But Nkechi," she paused, "what else is he hiding?" Nkechi looked at her carefully. "What do you mean?" "A man who is comfortable with that level of secrecy for that length of time is a man who is practiced at keeping things from people he cares about." Chidinma held her gaze. "I am not saying he is bad. I am saying, do you know everything? Not about his money, about him, his life before he came back, what happened abroad." The word sat between them like something with weight. "Nkechi has mentioned abroad," she said slowly. "He spent 4 years in the UK. He said he came back to build something here." "That is what he said," Chidinma replied. "But what happened there?" Nkechi opened her mouth and then closed it. Because the truth was, she did not know. She had not asked. She had been so careful not to press him the way people had clearly pressed him before, so careful to take him at face value that she perhaps allowed some very important questions to go unasked. She drove home that evening with a strange unease settling into her chest alongside the joy. She was getting ready for bed when her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her press the green button. "Hello?" The voice was a woman's, calm, almost gentle, accented in a way that suggested Lagos by way of somewhere else. "Is this Nkechi, Tobechukwu's fiancé?" Nkechi went still. "Who is this?" "That does not matter right now." A pause. "What matters is that you deserve to know the truth before you walk into something you cannot walk back out of." "What truth?" Nkechi asked, her heart now a loud, insistent presence in her chest. "What Tobechukwu did in London, why he really came back to Nigeria, and who is still waiting for him to answer for it." A pause.
deliberate and waited. Ask him about Adanna, ask him what happened to her, and then decide whether that ring should stay on your finger. The line went dead. Nkechi stood in the middle of her bedroom for a very long time, the ring on her finger catching the light, the silence around her suddenly enormous. The joy had not left, but now something else lived beside it, something with teeth. And outside, the city carried on, not knowing that a woman was standing very still in a lit room, holding a phone with a deadline, realizing that the man she had chosen might be holding a story she had not been given the chapter to read yet. If this story has your heart racing right now, comment below and tell us where you are watching from. Lagos, Abuja, London, Houston, Toronto, wherever you are, let us know. Share this video with someone who loves a good Nigerian drama and subscribe if you haven't, because the next part is going to shake everything up. Like the video before you leave. We will see you in the next one.